Welcome to year 2 of A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.
Hosted by 4-time Emmy-nominated producer
Frank Pace. And retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guest, 7-time Emmy Award Winning sports journalist and author, Roy Firestone.
No, Frank was in a rock band. How you doing, my brother?
Good, you?
Good. Could be any better, brother.
What do you know?
What do I know? What do you hear? What do you say?
Yeah, well, what do you say?
What do I say?
By the way, that's Derek Harris. We got Roy Firestone on the show today. It'll be a great show. I'm really looking forward to talking to Roy.
5,000 interviews, man.
I know. Isn't it unbelievable? He knows everybody in the world. I was thinking when I met him that who knew more people? He fucking knows 10 times the amount of people that I know.
Yeah, I tell you, 5,000, and including Nixon, man. I mean, that must be from the big sports stars. And we'll get onto it when he comes on. You know,
I got it. Don't worry about it.
You got that's Derek Harris, our intrepid third man in the booth. What do you got, Derek?
What you worried about?
Well, I got what you're worried about. Speaking of clap,
speaking of the clap,
you know what I was thinking of the other day. If this country legalized prostitution and taxed it, no more debt.
Yeah, without a doubt, no more debt. And if just think what it would do for the doctors in the world with treating the clap.
Well, the hell with the doctors. I mean, just look at what it would do for society. I mean, Australia is legal. Right. Prostitution's legal. Right. Canada's prostitution's legal.
Is it?
Absolutely.
Oh, I didn't know that. I got to take a couple of trips across the border. No, but yeah, without a doubt, tax it, and of course, it's the oldest profession in the world. It's not going anywhere. You know.
So I mean, if prostitution was legal, and if drugs were legal, and they were taxed, this country would be out of debt.
Well, how many fucking people are in jail right now doing time for smoking pot?
Well, I don't know. Tons.
I mean, probably 40% of the people that are locked up are incarcerated for doing pot. You know, like in the South, especially Florida, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, they bust a guy for doing pot and they give him 10 years. You know, like ridiculous.
It's crazy.
And now R.J. Reynolds and all the big boys are on board. Now they're advertising it all over the place.
Speaking of R.J. Reynolds, did you read that Mark Cuban is starting an online prescription drug site where he's going to sell the drugs for 15% over. He's going to buy the drugs at cost, and then he's going to sell them to the public for 15% over cost. So,
and I bet it's still 40% cheaper than what the pharmaceutical companies are selling it for.
Oh, it's like more than 40%. It's probably like 80% below what the public.
Incredible. He's going to make a fortune.
I think he will.
Without a doubt.
I think he will.
Because they've been raping us for years, you know?
Yep.
I mean, I got a buddy, the Tinker. You know, you heard me talk about the Tinker many times. And he has bone cancer. And, it's in remission now. But when he first got it, he called me up. He said, Billy, if I had a gun next to my bed, I'd blow my freaking brains out.
Yeah.
Because the pain was like incredible, right?
Yeah.
He takes a pill. Yes, this little tiny pill every day. It's $500 a pill.
Yeah. It probably costs $5 to produce.
Who the hell? How can anything cost $500 a pill? Cost $500? It's ridiculous. But you need to stay alive. You rob a bank.
Of course.
You rob a bank if you got to do it.
Yep.
But speaking of prostitution legal, segue into speaking of prostitution legal.
Why don't you tell me about your Australian trip?
You
weren't married then.
I wasn't married then, Frank. But loose lips will sink ships. But I wasn't married. But I told you on the phone how the word hooker came into existence.
How did it get? Tell the audience.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like there's two versions. One is in Britain in the old days, back in the 1800s, early 1800s, the women of the street, or the women of the night, if they saw a guy walking by that they wanted a proposition, they'd hook his arm. That was one version. But the version that I heard and I like is in the Civil War, there was one of Lincoln's generals called Wild Joe Hooker. True story. And Wild Joe Hooker always outnumbered the Confederates like 3-1, 2-1, 3-1, and he would never attack. And nobody could figure out, Lincoln couldn't figure out why he was so non-aggressive. He would never attack. So one day he pulled a surprise visit down to one of Hooker's camps. I think it was in West Virginia. And he comes up, and the camp, everybody's drinking. Like the sentries are all right, but everybody else is drinking, and there's women all over the place, right? Women of ill repute. And they called them Hooker's girls because they used to follow the army because obviously there's a lot of money to be made if you're following the army, you know. And so that's Hooker's girls, and then later on they shortened it to Hookers, and that's how the word hooker comes about.
Well, you might ask me how I know that Australia has legalized prostitution. Billy told me.
So yeah, when I first got to Australia, yeah, you know what? Australia, all my life, I had read, and whether it was true or not, I don't know, but when I was a kid, I had read that Australia, which is true, they took a terrible beating in World War II. You know, a lot of their men were wiped out. So I had always heard there's 5 women to every man in Australia. So I was naturally, as a kid, I always wanted to go to Australia. But finally I got the opportunity with the police fire Olympic Games. You know, they have these Olympic Games from cops and firemen all over the country. And they always pick great places to have them. You know, obviously they're going to go for a week or two, and they always have great spots to do it in, you know. They had it in L.A. one year, but they had...
Get on with the story.
They had it in Australia.
Get on with the story,
so
for
I said,
Christ's sake.
Australia, this is it. I got to get to Australia. And the anticipation, when I said, no way this place is going to live up to the expectations I had. I got there. They outlived the expectations. It was terrific. And we went to Melbourne, you know, which was always south of Australia. So it's once you get to Australia, it's another 3,500 miles to get to Melbourne. But I get there, and I get to the hotel room, and I pick up a phone book, and I start looking through the phone book, you know, things to do, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, I go right to escort service. Things to do. And I'm paging page after page after page of escort service. I said, what the hell's going on here, man? It's crazy. So I call the concierge. Is that it, the concierge? Concierge, whatever. And I says, hey, pal, listen, I'm a fireman. I'm up in a room 204, whatever, and I'm with, you know, the group of 300. I said, what the hell's going on with this phone book here? He says, page after page of hookers. I said, why are there so many hookers? He said, oh, prostitution's legal in Australia, mate. I said, legal? You got to be shitting me. No, it's legal. I says, cash? No, they take credit cards. It's the credit cards. I can get frequent flyer miles.
Too bad they didn't take checks.
Yeah, if they take a check. Send me 10. Oh, you'll take a check. But yeah, so sure enough, man. I says, well, what do you look? How do they look? He says, oh, what are you in the mind for? And I didn't know anybody. Obviously, I didn't know anything about Australia. I says, someone that looks like Ellie McPherson, you know, because I knew she was in Australia.
Elle McPherson.
I thought it was Ellie McPherson.
Elle.
But anyway, they sent me one that looked like Ellie.
Only one?
No, I asked for 2. Well, it's funny. I was with this young guy. I was with like a probie in my room. And I says, I'm going to get a couple of hookers. He says, I don't do that. You know, he says, you do what you want, but I don't get hookers. Well, these 2 chicks showed up at the door. One looked like Ellie McPherson. The other one was a wacky one. She had spiked.
Looked like Ellie Howard.
No, she was good looking, but she was wacky. I could tell she was wacky. Right away, I wanted the wacky one, you know, 'cause I like wacky. And as soon as they showed up, this guy says, I'm in on the hookers, right? I says, you said you didn't want? No, I'm in on the hookers. But 2 knockouts. And yeah, so prostitution's legal. Gambling's legal in Australia. But I mean, I went bungee jumping. I went diving at the Great Barrier Reef. And it was cool. The guy says to me, the dive master. I was in up in Cairns is where the reef is, you know, where the Great Barrier Reef is. And of course, I'm not going to go to Australia without diving the Great Barrier Reef. I want to, you know, do it. And it was storms all offshore, and I was kind of worried because I was only going to be in Cairns.
Is this going to be a long story? Because we got to get to Roy pretty soon.
Well, just segue to him, no problem. I don't want to keep you awake.
No, you're not keeping me awake. I'm just hoping it's going to be a short story.
Oh, well, real quick, the guy says to me, look, you're the only diver I got. Everybody else is looking for glass bottom boats and snorkelers. He says, you're the only guy I've got wants to dive. He goes, what do you want to see? So I'm from the Bronx. I don't know nothing. I guess I want to see big fish, big fish. He goes, you want to see some sharks? I says, I think I want to see some sharks. I'm not sure, but sure enough, he took us on a small boat about 20 minutes out over the side. As soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by sharks. I mean, about 9 of them.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa, and the guy goes to me like this.
Did you get what you want?
He gives me the okay, and I figure, well, okay. And I swear to God, Frank, after about 8 minutes, absolutely inconceivable, I turned my back on the sharks. I was like, okay, I saw them. What else is around here?
Were you in a cage?
No.
Oh, wow.
No, but it was during the day. Sharks feed at night. They feed at night, and their eyesight is poor, is why they usually bite us.
Wow.
They don't have good eyesight at all. They do everything by smell. It's almost like sonar. They can zoom in. They say a shark can smell.
Are you going off on another tangent? Because
they say a shark can smell a drop of blood in an Olympic-sized swimming pool from 10 miles away.
Wow.
I just want to say that the ratio of women to men in Australia, that ratio was not true.
No, when I was a kid, that was what I had read.
Yeah. Sounds like a kind of a marketing ploy.
Well, it might have been, but it worked for me.
Exactly.
What is the ratio?
It's 1-to-1 pretty much. It's 98% men to 100% women. So
yeah, well, when I was a kid, I always heard it was 5-to-1. So it was always a place I wanted to go. But it is a great place. Australia is a great country.
A place that I want to go is to Roy Firestone.
All right, yes, I understand.
Derek,
you'd rather talk to Roy Firestone 5,000 interviews than me?
Derek, can you please get our 7-time Emmy Award winning journalist Roy Firestone on the phone, please?
I mean, I can, but I really would like to hear another story.
Glad to see you.
Well, you'll hear it on the wrap up then.
Wrap this.
Well, let's bring on our guest, 7-time Emmy Award winning journalist, stand-up comedian, nightclub singer, whatever you want. He's a great guest for us to get. Roy Firestone. Hi, Roy. How are you?
Hey guys, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me.
That's my partner Billy O'Connor, and that's my other partner Derek Harris.
Real honor, Roy. Real honor to meet you, brother. Really honor.
Oh, well, I don't know what about an honor, but it's always a pleasure to do these things. You get a chance to stretch out and talk about stuff in life and whatever.
You've done what, 5,000 interviews?
More, closer to 6 now. Because I just started a new series on ESPN that will be airing in May. The first special is going to be airing in May called Goats, which obviously people know called Greatest of All Time. I did 15, 5-star people interviews, everybody from Jerry West, Martina Navratilova, Isaiah Thomas, Dr. J. We interviewed Cal Ripken, we interviewed Pete Rose, but people who were the greatest in what they did in their generation. But we get a lot of backstory. In the case of Jerry West, perhaps the best interview I think I've ever done, if I say for myself, because it was so powerful, so moving, so harrowing at the same time, because he had been abused by his father. He talked about it openly. Now, some people know the story, but most people don't, to such a point in the case of Jerry West where he had a gun under his pillow. He was willing to kill his father if he abused him one more time.
Wow.
And he had the loaded gun under his pillow. And it was very moving. I had known there was some kind of trauma as a kid, but I didn't know to the extent. He talked about it in his book, but it was such an amazing story. And we did about almost 2 hours, and we're going to use probably about 15 minutes. But that's television these days.
Well, let me tell you what I know that how I knew Jerry West was such a great guy. When the late Joe McDonald passed away, who you know, I'm sure, Jerry West showed up at his funeral. And he was the only guy of note that was there. There was a bunch of writers and broadcasters there, but Jerry West showed up at his funeral, and it told me so much about Jerry West.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's been through a lot. And, at the end, we talked about Kobe. We'll get back to talking about Kobe later, perhaps in the show, but he was so numb, really, from what happened, because he had just spoken to Kobe, and Kobe refused to do an interview for his book, his Jerry West book, And Jerry was hurt by that because, Jerry was like a father figure. Apparently, the real reason was Kobe just felt it was too emotional for him to talk about, so he didn't do it for the book. But they had just they never really were at odds, but they had just more or less, for lack of a better phrase, buried the hatchet. And it was just a couple of weeks before, and then, of course, the tragedy happened. He says, I don't think I've ever really been the same. He said, I think that I was walking around in a daze for weeks at a time. I was just completely out of it. Jerry talking.
Wow.
And, he was, if it weren't for Jerry West, Kobe Bryant would have never been a Laker, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But he talked about that. I could have just done the interview just about that. That was about a half hour right there. But it was pretty emotional. But I also, as I said, I interviewed Dr. J talking about, and it's not all sad stuff, but the tragic part of Dr. J, as you may or may not know, he lost his son.
Yes.
Who had a drug problem, but crashed his car into a pond, and they didn't find his son for like a week or two. And his name was Corey Irving, and now he's a grandson, Corey III. But he talked about his regrets. Dr. J did, Julius did, and it was heavy stuff. The one thing that I missed most about doing interviews is really getting the people's story.
You were famous for making people cry, Roy.
Right.
Don't make me cry, right?
Everybody says that, but the irony is, we've counted it. We literally put a counter on it, and I think we made 18 people cry out of 5,000. Do the math; that's not that many.
Well, close to 6,000 now, and
right, that's right.
and these are
But
coming from the
funny?
archives. When is
You know
this
what's
going to be?
funny, Frank and Billy? What's funny about this is now, especially with social media being what it is, if you get I never believed I got someone to cry. I believed they cried because it was close to the surface what they were feeling. But now if you get that, it's viral. It's all over the internet. People want to see that. And while I never really intentionally did it, I think people felt comfortable in the show enough to where they were bearing their soul. In some cases, in other cases not. But 18 out of 5 or 6,000 is not a large percentage. I can literally tell you the guys who cried. Rodman was the most famous one because when he started to weep, the director of Jerry Maguire, Cameron Crowe, was watching it. And he actually was trying to cast Dennis Rodman as Rod Tidwell in Jerry Maguire. That was his original idea.
Mm-hmm.
He saw Rodman. He wanted Rodman to play the role of Rod Tidwell, and it just wasn't working out. And then Rodman turned him down entirely. And, Cuba Gooding Jr. ended up winning the Academy Award for that role. And, of course, my scene, the famous scene, is something that I'll take with me to the grave. It's one of my greatest thrills to be in a scene with an Academy Award winner. And I don't know, maybe I think that part of my scene might have helped him get that award. But the night that he won, I was thrilled. I was jumping up and down. I had a little piece of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that must have been very gratifying for you to even been in a movie, but then to be in there with Cuba Gooding.
Well, I'll tell you a little story. I don't know if you guys are going to drop pictures in live today or in post.
We'll put them in post.
Okay. I'll tell you a quick story about it. I know we got a lot of ground to cover, but when I first got the opportunity to do Jerry Maguire, Cameron Crowe called our studio and said, "Do you have anybody who's Roy Firestone like?" And my producer said, "Well, you would like to talk to Roy Firestone?" I felt like saying, No, I don't mean Roy Firestone, but somebody liked Roy. Anyway, so they hired me, and I assumed that the scene was going to be seen in the cutting room floor. That's the only place it would be seen. When I get to the studio, Sony Studios in Culver City, I went on the lot. I'm looking for the actual studio, which studio was shooting Jerry Maguire. No one knew what the movie was about, so no one knew where anything was. So I had to go from door to door. So I finally go to 16B. I'm just going to make up the name, whatever it was. And I knock on the door for the studio, and opens the door. Who opens the door? Tom Cruise. Literally opened the door. I mean, wow. You talk about shock. And then, by the way, he's about 5'4". He's a little guy, but I couldn't believe it. And he goes, "Hey, Roy, what do you think about the Reds? What do you think about the Reds?" He's talking about like baseball and sports. He's a big sports guy. I said, and then he goes, have you met Cuba? So I never heard of this guy. He wasn't a star yet, certainly not a big star. He was in maybe a couple other movies.
Right.
I said, well, I lived in Miami. That's not far from Cuba. He goes, what do you mean? Right? He says, no, Cuba. And I said, yeah, Cuba, 90 miles from Miami. He goes, no. He says, Cuba Gooding Jr. I said, I have no idea who you're talking to. He says, let me bring you over. He introduces me. The guy was not a sports fan, Cuba Gooding Jr. He was a rollerblader. That was and he played roller hockey. That's about but he did not follow sports. So he really didn't know much about who I was. So the two of us, not really knowing each other, had to do a scene like there was a very intimate, heavy, emotional scene, which was comic and sad at the same time. We do the scene, and the line was, you might remember where I go, your brother lost a leg in a tragic bass fishing accident, because they wanted me to ad-lib some things that happened to this guy over the years. And I'm making stuff up. And if you look at the scene now, if you look very carefully before they cut away back to me, you can see him going, like he's trying not to laugh. It was a total ad-lib. Anyway, so the scene goes on, and I think it's going to be on the cutting room floor, and it wasn't. It's a big scene, it's a crucial scene, which will always be in there. He goes from across the table when he gets the contract and hugs me. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't ready for that either. He ad-libbed that too. And I'm on a rolling chair on a platform, and I start to roll back because he grabbed me so fast, I start to fall. If I had fallen, I would have hit my head, probably been knocked out. And two grips caught us. And that was the scene. We took 2 takes. The first one was that where I almost fell over. The second one's the one we used. They used little pieces of both of them. But here's the postscript to this great story. I hadn't even seen the movie. I forgot about it. My neighbor said, Roy, I saw you with Jerry Maguire last night. I said, who is Jerry Maguire? I don't know anybody. He goes, no, you idiot, the movie. I went, oh, did I make the movie? He goes, make the movie. It's a crucial scene in the movie. It's like the most important scene in the whole movie. And I went, of course, the next day to 11 a.m. running at Universal Studios to see that. I was like 4 people in this theater. 6 months later, I'm in Liverpool, England, and swear to God, I'm at a reception, and Paul McCartney was supposed to be there, but he wasn't there, at least not till 2 a.m., and I was all jet lagged out. We went to see Paul McCartney perform at the Cavern Club. I'm a huge Beatles person. And finally, my friend goes, Roy, he's right behind you. I said, who's right? And I turn around, and it's Paul McCartney. And he looks at me, and he goes, hey, where do I know you from? He goes, where do I know you from? I said, Paul, you don't know me from anywhere. This is a thrill for me. He goes, no, I know you. I said, no, you don't. Yes, I do. And finally, the woman who was his publicist or something said, he means the movie. His music's in the movie. I went, oh, you mean Jerry Maguire? He goes, that's it. You're the guy who makes him cry. I said, well, I guess so. He goes, what's your name? I said, my name is Roy. He goes, don't make me cry, Roy. Now, Paul McCartney saying that just about made my life, And the irony is, in the movie, if you really look at it, Cuba Gooding Jr. never says, don't make me cry, since he said, you're not going to make me cry. Right. He never said, don't make me cry, Roy. Paul McCartney is the first person who's coined the phrase, don't make me cry, Roy. Now, at every airport, every car wash, every supermarket in my life, every day of my life, they go, don't make me cry, Roy. Everyone says that. And ball players, athletes, it's a calling card for me. Yeah. But the idea that Paul McCartney would see that just shows you the reach of a movie that he saw it. And the reason he saw it so many times, he saw the movie 30 times, because he was trying to place his music where he wanted it in the movie. So he kept rewinding it over and over again. And that was probably the biggest thrill I had in public life, for sure.
How'd you get interested in the Beatles?
Well, I'm from Miami Beach. And the second week the Beatles were in America, they came to Miami Beach to do on the Ed Sullivan Show. People forget there were back-to-back Ed Sullivan shows. Correct. Famous one, I think there was 67 or 70 million people saw it, which in those days was just about almost every television that was turned on that night. And they played a place called the Deauville Hotel, which, by the way, is being torn down as we speak. So that's the end of that era. But they played at a hotel, and I lived about 6 blocks from the famous picture of Ali or Cassius Clay back then.
Right.
We're fighting with the Beatles, doing that promotional photo. I lived so close, literally I could walk to it. There was the Fifth Street Gym where Ali, then Clay, was training. But another cool part of the story is, and I don't want to get too long-winded because I know we have a lot of stuff, but I'm in school, and my friend Johnny Pollock and I used to get together, twice a week, go over his house or he'd come over to my house. I say, "Hey, Johnny, want to get together after school?" He goes, "I can't." I said, "Why not? Dentist appointment or something?" He goes, "No, I can't." "Well, can you tell me why?" He goes, "I can't tell you why." Well, when you're 8 years old or 9 years old, a kid telling you he can't tell you why, that opens the door of, you got to tell me why. And he wouldn't tell me. He says, "I'm not allowed to tell." Then when I heard, "I'm not allowed to tell you." So it turns out the Beatles were staying at his house because they couldn't deal with the security problems at the hotel where all the screaming girls were. So Johnny Pollock, my friend, the Beatles stayed there for 4 nights. All those photographs of the Beatles in swimming pools and water skiing, that's Johnny Pollock's father's boat. That's their swimming pool.
Wow.
So it had an enormous impact on me. And I'm a very sentimental person, very nostalgic person. If you ever saw my house is decorated in, lots of sports memorabilia and a lot of Beatles memorabilia. And it's a throwback to all my great memories. But Beatles were the most important creative force in my life, as it is for a lot of people. I'm not a musician, but I do sing. But I can tell you that their being on the Ed Sullivan Show when I was, maybe 8 or 9, was truly a critical moment for me. I just thought, I want to be around a microphone. I'm not going to be a Beatle, but I want to be around a microphone. And then the other part of it is when I was bat boy for the Orioles in spring training in the 1970-71 seasons with Brooks and Frank and Boog Powell and Jim Palmer, Cuellar, all those guys. I got to meet players up close, no pun intended, up close, because that was the name of the show. And I further wanted to be around a microphone. I wanted to have something to do with broadcasting, because between the Beatles and baseball, those were my 2 biggest loves, and still are.
So let me ask you, you have an interesting story about how you became the Orioles bat boy. Why don't you tell us that?
Well, I grew up in Miami. There were no major league Marlins. The minor league team, AA team, was the Marlins. But you get in there for 50 cents, and it's a minor league game. No one cared. But I always looked at when the Orioles came to town to train, because they trained first in Miami when I was a kid. It was like the circus coming to town because we had no real professional sports. Even in 1965, there wasn't even a Miami Dolphins. So I'm like, teenager or early teens. And I wanted, 14, 15, I wanted to meet the truck, the Orioles equipment truck. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even drive yet. My mother drove me there. We waited outside for 2.5 hours. Finally, the truck pulls up because it said in the paper, equipment is coming in today. So they get off the truck, big moving van with these huge, stevedore type of things, these, big cases. And I said, "Hey, can I help you?" He said, Get lost, kid. Get out of here. I said, "I'd really like to help." "All right, you can help with this. Bring that in." And meanwhile, as I'm doing it, I'm talking to them, going, "Oh, I'm a huge base fan. I'm a huge fan." And, yeah, kid. I said, "Do you have anybody to help you Monday?" And they went, "Well, actually, we don't, because the other kid was sick. But why? What do you want to do?" I said, "I would like to just help you unload." And so it was like being in the circus truck was coming. I helped them unload it, and then I talked my way into becoming a clubhouse boy.
At 15. 15
or 14, yeah. And the first guy I met that day, when the players started coming, was Brooks Robinson. And I'm a huge Brooks Robinson fan. And I don't know how much your audience, you have younger demographics, I'm sure, too. I don't know if they even know who Brooks Robinson is, but he's probably the greatest defensive third baseman of all time, and among the greatest third basemen, period. Maybe Schmidt is better, but not many. He says, hey, partner, you want to play some pepper? So within 5 minutes, I went from just some jerk on the street, some little kid, to playing pepper with my idol.
And Pepper,
we are still friends 51 years later.
That's
he
amazing.
Stayed at my house when Frank Robinson's memorial was in Los Angeles. he remains a very dear friend of mine. And the greatest thing of all that's ever happened to me was when they unveiled the statue of him at Oriole Park and Camden Yards in Baltimore. Brooks called me up and asked me, would I introduce it with a speech?
Wow.
Well, I mean, I don't know that you could possibly get a bigger thrill than that. For me, it's being able to tell there were thousands and thousands of people at this thing. It's on YouTube. But that I'm sitting there telling my hero why I love him and why I admire him. You don't get that many chances in life to do something like that. You don't get a chance to tell it to your father or your brother necessarily. But to say it in public, the guy that I idolize, and he's emotional, I'm emotional. It was a tremendous day. And so between the Beatles and the Orioles, those are my big thrills, and those are my big connections to getting into broadcasting in the first place. And there's so many other stories that go with it.
But how'd you get your first broadcasting job in Miami?
Well, I almost kind of talked my way into that too.
I figured you might have.
I kind of I putted around with the big station, which was the CBS affiliate in those days, WTVJ. And one thing led to another. I got an internship. And I think I topped out, and I worked like 60 hours a week. I think they gave me $80 for the week. And I was thrilled to get it, by the way. And then they said, there's an opening for weekend sports at the ABC affiliate. Why don't you go over and audition? But then I have a lot of ham in me. Frank knows this because Frank.
You think?
Yeah, a lot. But I went up there and I pretended I was a sportscaster, reading teleprompter. Hi again, everybody. I'm Roy Firestone, and welcome to And it was kind of ad-libbing my way through it. And they said, you have pretty good energy. You're raw material here, but we think you've got some ability. I was given the job, and I went from $80 a week to $250 a week.
And you were in Clover.
Hey, I thought it was in those days. I really did. I thought it was a lot of money. Then I got canned after 2 years because I was too young, and I came out to Los Angeles. So I went from what the expression "fail your way."
Didn't you go in to get a raise and then you got canned?
That's right. Very good. I went in there. I said, the guy's name was Dow. His first name was Dow. That was his name. His name was Dow. I said, hey, Dow, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm starting to catch a little momentum here in town, and people starting to write things about me. And I said, I'm going to pitch going from the 250 to 350, if you don't mind, if we can maybe make that happen. I think I'd like to maybe sign a new deal. I didn't have a deal to sign, by the way. There was no contract in those days. He goes, I'm glad you came in because you're fired. You're not working with us anymore. I went, well, I could go back to the 250. It's not that big a deal. It was so humbling. And by the way, this is an inspiring part of the story. And by the way, I'm far from the most unique person to tell stories like this. If you ever get canned, anyone who's listening, and you think it's the end of the world, or if you break up with somebody that you love or loved, or they shock you, something happens in your life where you think it'll never be what it was, there's a chance something better could come along. Not necessarily, but in my case, I went from being fired thinking I'd never work again, and to getting, at the time, one of the greatest jobs in my life, working at CBS, KNXT, KCBS, working with Brent Musburger and Jim Hill and Connie Chung and all those people. It really groomed me into becoming whatever kind of journalist I might be. I think I'm half shtick, half journalist. But it groomed me. But I'll tell you a very quick story. My father was sorry for me, and he was heartbroken for me because, let's face it, father's pride. I'm in Miami, my hometown, and all of a sudden he's got to tell his friends that his son is not working there anymore. So I had to think about his feelings too. So I was getting some nibbles. I got a nibble from Des Moines, Iowa. And I told my father, he goes, that's a great market. Des Moines is great. It's only 11 hours out of Chicago or whatever it was. I said, Dad, Mars is 11 hours out of Chicago. But it just shows you, I guess the moral to the story is you really should never give up on yourself, because something better can, not always, but something better can come along.
Yeah, and if you don't quit, but you give it a chance.
Right.
If you stay in the game, you got a chance to compete in the game. If you quit and get out,
But you would know that from all the shows and all the things that you've done in your life. You know, it's a business, broadcasting, acting, episodic, what commercials, where the rejection is everywhere. And if you can't handle rejection, and I, by the way, couldn't when I was 22. I was on the air at 21 years old in Miami. 21. I don't know a lot of people who've been on the air at 21 on TV. Now, maybe in radio stringers and stuff like that. But, you know, I just thought it was over. And I'm so proud to say, you know, this is going to be, let's see, 45 years in Los Angeles.
Well, you know, I always say, and I wrote in our book, If These Lips Could Talk, if after 50 times somebody says no to you, you quit, that's unlucky. If after 500 times someone says yes to you, that's the definition of luck.
Yeah.
Because there's so much rejection.
Well, at the centerpiece of that, Frank, is persistence.
Yep.
If you aren't, listen, I'm going to tell you a very, very quick story about Edison. Thomas Edison, I'm not making this up, was experimenting with the incandescent light bulb in the early 20s, I think maybe the late 10s, could have been 1919, 1920, right around there. He failed 10,000 times, not 100 times, 10,000 times. So a guy comes up to him, it's a reporter, and says, Mr. Edison, you've done a lot of wonderful things, but 10,000 times that you failed. What is it like to fail 10,000 times? He said, fail 10,000 times? I haven't failed 10,000 times. I've succeeded 10,000 times. He goes, what do you mean? I've succeeded in knowing what won't work.
Correct.
And I will find what will work. So all of those 10,000 failures are successes to me. What a great attitude and what a great way of looking at life in taking shots at things. So if you out there, folks, and I'm not exactly, you know, Tony Robbins or anything like this, but Dale Carnegie or anything, but if you failed and you're down, just realize you just know that what maybe won't work, and maybe you can find what will work, and then you'll work.
Yeah,
And,
Lincoln was another one. Lincoln was a total failure all his life. Fail. But I heard a great definition of success. I heard success is like somebody compared to pregnancy. Everybody congratulates you when you're pregnant, but they don't realize how many times you've been screwed.
Yeah. Well, he had also, Lincoln had manic depression. He was rejected. He lost multiple political races. He was counted out so many times. He had to deal with a crazy, crazy woman in his wife, Mary. She was certifiable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he gets killed. But he also brought the Union together, and he also saved this country. So, by the way, I'm not even comparing, Billy, I know you're not either, what we do to what Lincoln did.
No.
But the truth is, life is about adjusting to rejection and failure. And if you look at failure as a kind of success in its own weird way, I mean, I think I was successful in getting the hell out of Miami, but I wouldn't have left if I hadn't been fired.
Right.
So in a strange, and one more postscript to the story, we had a reunion for that station of 45, it was about 5 or 6 years ago.
I hope Dow was still alive.
Well, he was. And he was there. And, you know, I don't know, Billy, you know, you've been through a lot in your life, but to be able to say to somebody, hey, thank you for showing me the door in some ways because I became somebody better. So I really wanted to be able to say something like, so I went with a friend of mine and I said, I'm going to walk up and thank him. She goes, don't do that. He's going to be a man. I said, I want to truly thank him. I know he doesn't think that I want to thank him, but because I kind of deep down wanted him to say, hey, I was wrong. You know, I was hoping that he would say that. I walked up to him and said, hey, Dow, he's much gray now. He's very heavy. And I said, I want to thank you for the opportunity that you gave me. And I was humbled by being fired, but things happened for me and I'm very grateful. He goes, well, you know, you weren't ready. That's all he said. So don't ever look for people to say, oh, you know, I was wrong. They're not going to, no one likes to admit that they were wrong. And maybe he wasn't wrong for his time, but I just, I'm so grateful. I mean, gratitude is everything, man. It's like how you look at your life is full of, not just half full glasses, but being grateful for being able to breathe and being able to walk the streets and be healthy enough, especially in these times, to live a life And again, we're in very, very hard times, very challenging times. But to be grateful, I'm talking, Frank knows this because Rod Carew is really a very, very inspirational figure to me. And this is a guy who should have been dead probably three times. And he's endured also tragedy with his own daughter losing her life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's still grateful. And he's grateful for all the things that happened in his life. I think Michelle, his daughter, helped before she died teach him humility and gratitude. And Rod's a tremendous person and done so many wonderful things with Children's Hospital in Orange County. But he had a lot of hardship and a lot of tragedy in his life. And I did a thing.
And he was an abused child also.
Yes, he was.
His father used to beat him and put him in a closet when he lived in Panama. And he's really never gotten over that.
His full name is Rodney Cline Carew, but the reason his name is Rodney Cline is a Dr. Cline delivered him on a subway in Panama.
On a train in Panama, not a
subway.
On a train,
right, yeah. train. And he never forgot that. So he changed, he was named for the doctor, Rodney Cline Carew. Anyway, I look at his life and I look at all the setbacks with cancer. He had cancer of the jaw, cost $100,000 to reconnect his jaw and reconstruct his jaw. He could have died there. One of his best friends was Tony Gwynn, who did die from the same thing. And then he had a heart transplant, obviously. That's well chronicled. But think of all the setbacks and think of all the hardships.
He was good friends with Lyman Bostock, who was killed was shot in a car at 28 years old, 27 years old. It was one of his best friends.
That's right. But I mean, I think of all the things that, if you look at life as a series of tragedies or mishaps, you also, too, I think, need to look at your life of all the great things that should come away. Where would Rod have been if there wasn't a doctor on that train? Mm-hmm. Where would Rod have been if the people who tried to save Michelle Carew's life, if they hadn't been around? I mean, they were able to prolong her life. You couldn't save the bone marrow, didn't work. But then, where would he be without the transplant? And so my point was that we're all integrated as people, as human beings, and all the things we can do for one another. And so Rod Carew's life is a series of examples of how we can come together and be united and find a way to help one another instead of polarized with each other. We're a better society and a better planet. And I think the greatest testimony to that is he could tell all those stories, and he looks at his life as a gift. It shouldn't take losing your heart or having to be transplanted to realize that life is a gift, but it is. Well, and Billy knows that too. Billy, you could probably speak to that as better than anybody. Well, how lucky are you to be alive?
I couldn't agree with you more about life being a gift. Every moment is a gift. I mean, every single moment is a gift. You get up in the morning and say, hey, this is another day.
Again, it brings me back to the tragedy in the Bronx, the fire. How many firemen ran toward the danger instead of ran away from the danger? And Billy, for 20 years on the fire department, you were running toward danger.
Always.
And I give you great credit for that.
Here's another thing to remember. As tragic and as horrific and as appalling as the 9/11 tragedy was, it was not just a tragedy. Sometimes natural tragedy, things happen, fires, etc. This was obviously a terrorist attack. But the men and some women, but mostly men, who came to the aid of those people in those buildings, 1 out of every 6 that died that day were fire and rescue people. 1 out of every 6. And we lost 3,000 people that day. And also in D.C., let's not forget, and also Shanksville. But also remember this, they saved tens of thousands of lives. People are alive today because they got out of that building, in part because those fire and rescue people were showing them how to get out of that building.
And one thing I'm going to say, Roy, that Billy's told me quite often is, in addition to the 344 firemen that died, probably over 1,000 have died since.
Yes,
because of the carcinogens they were inhaling.
Yes, I have a friend on Facebook named Chris Garabrino, and he was a detective, and he was there that day, and he was in the building, and he had to also identify bodies, which was in many cases not full bodies. Let's just say that. And he told me that he's had health problems for 20 years, more or less, more than 20 years now. He should have been dead 3 or 4 times. He's known hundreds of his colleagues who have died, cancer, asbestos poisoning, kidney problems, liver problems. And these people, they finally got the aid they were seeking. It took a while, but finally Congress decided to pass an allocation for these people's medical
John
and
Stewart
health.
had a lot to do with that too. John
Jon Stewart had an awful
huge,
lot.
huge advocate for us.
Yes, tremendous stuff. And just again, I mean, I don't need to turn this into Dale Carnegie, but just remember how lucky you are to be breathing, folks. And if you have had COVID and you couldn't breathe and you're still alive, be lucky that you recovered.
Well, exactly.
Well, along this line, because it's not a happy topic, but I was watching recently the Jimmy V speech.
Yeah.
And then at the last instant, I caught a glance of Roy Firestone in the audience.
There.
Why don't you tell us what the Jimmy V speech was like, and how you responded?
Let me first of all say, it was at Radio City Music Hall. There's tons of people there. It was packed, and he had such advanced cancer he really couldn't walk up the steps to the podium. And I remember Jimmy V was escorted, I'll say the word, it's escorted by Dick Vitale, who, by the way, is also battling cancer right now.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that.
also Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski. And I'm right there. I'm like the 3rd or 4th row. I'm sitting next to Lou Holtz and Joe Theismann. And I don't think the guy's going to be able to make it up the stairs. He was like a limp sack. And he finally got up there, and something happened when he got on that stage.
The light went on.
The light went on, like when
Tony Bennett went on.
Yep. Tony Bennett also was at Radio City Music Hall. We saw it in December, and it was and he has Alzheimer's, and the light went on for him, and he became Tony Bennett. It was magical. Well, I always watched this Twilight Zone episode when Mr. Death is trying to take away Ed Wynn in this Twilight Zone character, and Ed Wynn talks him out of missing his time for a child he was going to take. He out-talked Death, basically. And I really believe that night, Jimmy V kind of out-talked Death. He stood at that podium, and for what it was, 18 minutes, he electrified that crowd, and he was alive, and he was out-dueling Death for how many weeks he had left. He was alive, and he was vibrant, and that speech will live forever. And the Jimmy V Foundation has raised tens of millions of dollars. And by the way, Dick Vitale, one of them, helped raise that money. He told me a story, by the way, just a little sidebar, that he went to a Taylor Swift concert with his daughters. This is probably 10 years ago. And he had no idea who Taylor Swift was, but he knew who Bill Swift was, who was a basketball coach in Pennsylvania. He knew him as a coach. And my daughter Taylor is the big star. I don't know who she is, but I'm sure she, right? Now she was still a giant 10 years ago. She was a big deal, right? They go backstage after the show, and she doesn't know who he is either. She goes, "Dad, who's this loud guy? He's a crazy guy." He goes, "Oh, that's Dick Vitale. He's a real character." And, "Well, what does he do?" And he gets introduced. He goes, "I'll tell you, I do Jimmy V Foundation." He starts laughing, and her eyes get really wide. She goes, "You do stuff for kids with cancer and people with cancer?" He goes, "Yeah, we've raised some money." She cuts a check right there, literally just a check for $100,000, and has done it every year for the last 10 years.
That's great.
She raised personally $1 million for the Jimmy V Foundation.
Everybody remembers Valvano's speech, but I remember the very ending was laugh every day, think every day, let something touch your heart every day.
And
that's
cry.
a day well spent.
People think that, we'll get back to the tears thing with me, but people think that crying is a weakness. It's a strength, man.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
To be able to cry and to be able to express your real feelings instead of hiding behind some veneer, it takes courage to cry. Now, again, on my show, whatever it was, 16, 18 people cried, but I think people are kind of remember that because it was authentic.
Yep.
And I think we live in a society that's very couched and very protected, and people don't really get to show who they really are. I mean, when Bob Saget just died, you finally learned if you didn't know, what a fabulous person this guy was, how much he touched people's lives, how much he cared for other people.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't take someone's, death for us to appreciate that. But again, it's all about being grateful. And it comes back to that great gratitude. I can't impress upon it enough. Listen, I've had my ups and downs in this business. I've been very successful. I've also had lots of slumps and tough periods, but you got to stay grateful. I mean, even for little things in your life, seeing your children grow up, being able to be on this planet with both your feet on the ground. It's,
those are the important things.
Such a blessing. That's the only thing that matters.
Those are the important things. See,
that's the only thing that really matters.
Yep.
And also in your life, if in your life you have done something that has made someone feel good, I have this phrase and I use it in my show, and I'll talk about this towards the end of the show if you want. Muhammad Ali's story, Frank, you know it too. But I think the most important thing is to uplift one another. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily in a religious way, but just uplift somebody in a gesture. Do a kind thing for somebody. We could use it now more than ever. And I think the problem is we've forgotten the ways to uplift each other, and we're at each other's throats. Whatever your politics might be, we need to stop that. We need to find a way. If we don't agree, fine. We can just agree to disagree. But we need to find a way to uplift each other, make people feel good about being on this planet. And that's my calling card in my life. That's what I really believe.
That's a whole different podcast. What America can do to get back together, because we're not together.
No, we're not
anymore, and we're not going to be. But let me tell you a quick Jim Valvano story that I'm sure you heard. He was at like 22, 23 years old when he was coaching Iona College, where Rick Pitino now coaches.
Yes.
And he went out to recruit one day, and he was recruiting a 17-year-old kid, and he introduced himself. He says, "I'm Jim Valvano, Iona College." And the 18-year-old guy said, "Holy crap! This guy owns a college. How old are you?" That was a great story.
I got one. I think I can up that a little bit.
Okay.
He was recruiting. He just got the job at NC State. I guess it was early '80s, and to this day I can't remember if it's Charleston or it's something like Charlestown or Charleston. There's one in North Carolina and there's one in South Carolina.
Right.
He was supposed to do a dinner for recruiting for the NC State in Charleston. There's a Charleston North and a Charleston South. I forget the name of this, but it's very close. He took the wrong flight to the wrong state. He gets off in South Carolina, where he's supposed to be in North Carolina. And he gets out and waiting for the car to pick him up. There's no car. So he hails a cab. He goes, go to the Coliseum. He goes, "We don't have a Coliseum." I go, "Oh boy, this is going to be tough." He goes, "Well, I'm the new coach of the Wolfpack. What do you think of that?" We hate the Wolfpack. we hate everything about them. I turn it off when they come on. So Valvano's thinking, "Boy, this is going to be tough recruiting in this area." Right? He was in the wrong state. He was in the wrong state.
Unbelievable.
And then finally he got back on the right plane and made the dinner. But he used to tell me that story. It was hysterical that he was in the wrong state for a dinner that he was supposed to do. But he did okay in that 1983 team when they won the title.
Yep.
Amazing.
It's still what everybody sees running around that court looking for someone to hug, he used to say.
I remember when I went to Charleston, South Carolina, I volunteered worldwide the service. I said, Vietnam, I don't care. I just want to see the world. They sent me to Charleston, South Carolina, and
That's
it was all these big signs, 200 years of history. And somebody wrote underneath it, "Unmarred by progress."
Well, but I think it was Charleston. There's a Charleston North and a Charleston South.
Yeah.
That must make for a few headaches.
So
I'm sure.
I'm going to give you.
Think they would have changed it by now, you know.
I know the way this podcast is going. I'm just going to give you words, and I'm going to let you go. So
okay. I'll try to keep them short too. How's that?
Don't just go.
Bruce Springsteen.
I'm a come lately to Bruce. I admit it. I never thought he had a tremendous singing voice. and I didn't pay too much attention with his lyrics. When I finally got to meet him, I went with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, not to drop a name, but that's a fact, in New York to see his Broadway show. I had a chance to speak to him, and I really got to watch his one-man show, telling stories. He's a storyteller. First and foremost, as great a rock icon as he is, he's a storyteller. I'm reading this book right now, Conversations with President Obama and Bruce Springsteen, and it's really powerful stuff. They're talking about family, and he said everything in his life that he wrote musically, for the most part, at 75 to 80% of everything he writes is really about his father, who was, had serious problems with depression, which, by the way, Bruce talked about too. But he's like a beacon of light. I think what he represents and speaks to, not all of it is so upbeat. Some of it's dark, like the Nebraska album was very dark. But Bruce Springsteen is truly the poet laureate of rock and roll, in my view. That's how I feel about it. And also a big sports fan. So that helped him.
Will Chamberlain.
Where do I start? I think he has, to this day, owns 60 to 70 records currently in the NBA. One year he averaged 50 points a game. That means 50 a night. Now you could say, oh, they're small guys and those. Yeah, they also had some great players too that he faced up. He had to go against Bill Russell. He had to go against Bob Lanier. He went against Nate Thurman. They were all great players. In fact, I would argue that some of those players at center, even if they were undersized, are better than a lot of the NBA centers today. So my quick story about Wilt is I come out of a restaurant in 1979. I wanted to have him on the show. And I see Wilt Chamberlain in a Rolls Royce, white Rolls Royce. The top is down. There were two dogs the size of horses, dominant. And in the front seat, on the passenger side, is a woman just packed into this leather dress, this blonde, right? And you're not allowed to say it anymore, but I used to say Wilt felt he was the NBA's all-time leading scorer. So I walk onto Wilt's side of the car, and he's got a silver and purple silk jumpsuit, a burgundy beret. He's got puka shells. He's got African walking stick. He's got no shoes. He's 7'2". At the time, he was probably 325. And he's got these orange tangerine sunglasses and zebra scarves and all this crazy stuff. So I said, Wilt, my name is Roy. I know who you are. I said, great. Would you like to do the show? He goes, Roy, I'd love to do the show, but right now I'm trying to keep a low profile. Wilt did not have the ability to keep a low profile. I would argue that he is the most charismatic, colorful, outrageous athlete I think before Rodman was Wilt. And Wilt did it every night, not just a couple of years like Rodman. I love Rodman. Rodman is my new show too for next year, for May. It starts in May. But the truth is that Wilt was an original. There was no one like a Wilt before Wilt. And they call him the Dipper, they call him the Stilt and all this stuff. But you just got to call him. There was one of one. That was Wilt Chamberlain. And my interviews with Wilt are online. It's on YouTube also. People want to check it out. This guy was fearless in what he spoke about. He lived his life to the fullest. He only made it to, I think, 63 years old. Yeah. And he suddenly died. And somebody once said, what was the cause of death? And the answer is life. Meaning Wilt lived a life. It was a short, happy life, fun life, extraordinary life, but he did live a life. And not a lot of people can claim what he claimed.
Yeah, well, I want to tell you, a lot of big men die young because we lose track of that because Kareem's still with us. And my friend Artis Gilmore is still with us. Yes. But many, many 7-footers and many, many big men have passed away prematurely, and that's a shame.
Yeah, I just did a story. I don't know if you saw it, Frank, this is going to blow people's mind. I'll make it quick. This guy was 6'9", was a great athlete, but he was also Mensa, meaning, almost brilliant. He went to Stetson, played basketball at Stetson, also was on the swim team.
In Florida.
And then he finally got he had a great deep voice because he was so big. And he got a radio job at WFAA in Dallas, Texas. And he was a studio announcer. And when President Kennedy was shot, he was the first person on radio on the scene and interviewed people who were eyewitnesses, and he was on the air for 11 hours. Fast forward several years later, he's auditioning, and he's too big to be a lead because he's just too tall, and all the other actors would be too small, so they never hired him. Finally, he got character jobs. You know that this is the guy who played Lurch on the Addams Family,
Ted Cassidy.
That was the guy, and he died prematurely too because he had the same glandular condition that Andre the Giant had.
Yeah,
and so I think Ted made it to 47 years old. So and Andre the Giant. But by the way, if anyone ever saw the documentary on Andre the Giant on HBO,
it was great.
Was maybe the best documentary I've seen. It was so moving and funny and touching and outrageous, but you could see how beloved he was. And I just thought that was a terrific piece of work, just a great piece of work.
Speaking of beloved, I'll give you another name, John Wooden.
Well, I think I sent you a picture of me, Kareem, Walton, and myself with Coach Wooden. And maybe Walton was not in that picture, but we had them all on together. I don't want to sound sacrilegious because everyone's flawed, but pretty close to a god, I would say, god-like person. This guy, every step and every breath he took in his life was about doing the right thing, doing the moral thing, doing the thing about character, and doing the job well. He was very fatherly to me, and obviously to his players who loved him to the last day. And Kareem, the only time I've ever seen Kareem really, really completely deferential to anybody was Coach. Anything that Coach wanted, he would come. They would watch old westerns at John's home in Encino, and he would talk about old baseball players. I remember Coach Wooden and I once talked. He said he once saw John Dillinger, the gangster, rob a bank, and it was near Purdue. Purdue was playing a basketball game. He was just a kid, John was, and Dillinger started firing his gun towards Wooden when he was, again, Wooden's like probably 15 years old, and he rolled under a car and saved his life. He saved his own life. But he said, he never forgot that experience where he saw John Dillinger, rob a bank. But I think he was the wisest. I think he was the smartest. I think he had the most character of anybody I've ever been around. I'll
tell you a story which I'm sure you've heard, but Bill Walton was a two-time All-American at the time at UCLA. And into his senior year, he showed up at Coach Wooden's with long hair and a beard, and he said, "Coach, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to keep the long hair and a beard this year." And he said, "Well, Bill, we'll miss you."
And all of a sudden,
he shaved and got a haircut.
And let me segue into Bill for a second.
Yeah.
I think that Bill Walton, and if you guys want some pictures, I'll send them to you. But I think Bill Walton is one of the sweetest human beings I've ever met.
He did the forward to your. He did the forward to your book. And why don't you give the book a little plug, Roy?
Oh, sure.
Don't Make Me Cry.
If you get it, well, there was a Don't Make Me Cry, Roy. That was my second book. My third book was That's What I'm Talking About.
Right.
And Bill wrote Bill is so grateful for me. It's ridiculous for him to think that I made his career, but we did put him on our TV show when he still had a bad stuttering problem, and he worked his way through it. And to this day, he credits me for giving. Some people will curse me for giving him the microphone. But I think Bill is the sweetest guy I've ever met, and he's authentic, and he's a real human being who loves life and loves people, and has done so many wonderful. We have a foundation, Frank knows this because we had Rod a few years ago, that does charity work for underprivileged kids, sports recreation, and Bill was our honoree, and we give him a check for his charity of $10,000, or he can keep it himself if he wants, no big deal. And he takes the check and he hands it to a paralyzed friend of his who was not killed, but was almost killed in an automobile accident, and it paid for his van and all of the facilities needed so this guy could get around. He just took the check and gave it right to this guy right in front of him.
Yeah.
He's just the sweetest guy. And I went to his house with a friend of mine who loved Bill Walton, and he had an entire breakfast buffet set up for us, and he catered it because my friend who had never met him before was coming to his house. This guy, they don't really have a lot of people on this planet named Bill Walton. And I'll tell you right now, I cannot say enough about this guy and his kindness and his big heart. And, you know, I did an interview, Frank, you may know this, Bill, you may know this too. He wanted to commit suicide when his back was so painful. He could literally not get off the floor. He ate meals on the floor because of his back.
Right.
And I think he had 57 surgeries.
57 surgeries?
57 surgeries. And finally they did a fusion in San Diego that worked. And every day it's a movie into itself. His wife, Lori, who may not be 5 feet tall, she every day would write. They would have a little schedule. Today, Bill walked to the bathroom. Today, Bill walked to the dinner table. Today, Bill, and every day they would have another achievement.
And they've been married more than 40 years, haven't they?
Yes, something about close to 40.
Yeah.
And Lori saved his life, and I said, what would you, I mean, it's kind of an abstract question, but if you had taken your life, what would you have missed? And he said, I would have missed every single thing, every single person, every single moment, every single joy. I would have missed every single up and down, and appreciate the ups and the downs too, if I took my life. And he says, I understand that pain because I was in such desperate pain that I didn't want to live anymore. But it just he's in the book, and I did a profile with him too. By the way, if people want to purchase the book, go to my website, royfirestone.com. It'll say books and music. I also have music on there too. If you want to buy it, I'll dedicate it to you. I'll describe it to you. And I also will talk about, I guess, in the final moments, about the Kobe book. But if you want me to personalize it, I will do that. The book's done very nicely. I'm very proud of that. But, you know, if people want to contact with me, I'm happy to do that. I never stand on ceremony or that stuff. But we have just a few moments left. I do, Frank and Bill, if it's okay, want to tell a story about Muhammad Ali.
Absolutely.
Please.
Okay, now I know that I think I sent you some pictures. When I started in this business, as I was 21 years old, my first interview was Muhammad Ali in Miami. He had just beaten Joe Frazier, the Thriller, in Manila. And so he's riding pretty high that week. So the first photo you see in black and white with my hair all buffed out, it was that moment. And then, you know, 35 years or 40 years later, I'm doing fundraisers for Parkinson's with Ali on stage. So I told this story one night in Phoenix, and he lived in Phoenix at the end of his life. And it's a true story. The week that I did that first interview, we went to a nursing home in South Beach, Florida. And there's probably 40 or 50 people, at least 90, but some into their hundreds, really old. Many of them have dementia. And he walks in, I'm so great, I'm fast, what is my name? And a couple of people are shocked who this big black guy is. Who is this guy? And finally an old lady, aren't you Clay? You know, it didn't go over that well. So he goes into another room and he starts in with this, I'm so pretty, I'm the greatest of all time. What is my, and he stops, he sees there's only one person in the room now. It's an old black guy in a wheelchair looking through a bay window. He's probably about 96, 97 years old. He goes, come on, old man, what is my name? No response. He says it again. Old man, do you know who I am? Nothing. Well, Ali starts to walk away. And as he's walking away with his entourage, I can see this guy, because I'm with my camera crew. This old guy's like, he hadn't spoken in weeks, hadn't eaten very much. And like a light bulb went on his head, his eyes get wide, and he turned his wheelchair and goes, hey. And Ali went, hey, what? Come over here right now. What do you want to say, old man? I want to say I know who you are. You know who I am? Yes, I do. I waited my whole life to meet the champ. I'm 97 years old and everybody in my family is dead. But you know what? My dream just came true because I finally got to meet the champ. My heart is so filled with joy and love. I met the greatest of all time. And Ali's eyes are getting all filled up and all the people are getting ready to cry. We're all getting ready to cry. It was so touching. And Ali goes back to the guy, he goes, you're right. I am the greatest of all time, and tell everybody in this room right now, what is my name? And the old guy goes, Joe Louis. Here's where the story takes on another dimension. Everybody in the room tried to correct the Joe. Hey, the old man, that ain't no Joe Louis. And Ali stopped him. What are you doing? But he said your name was. I know what he said. My name was. I could hear. He said, "Come over here for a second. And I can hear this. I'm about 3 feet away. He starts talking down to the people who were mocking this old man. How dare you do that? What's wrong with you? You people don't have no respect for people. You see that old man, 97 years old, his whole life, all he wanted to do was meet the champ. He's a good man, tried to raise money for his family, tried to work hard and put food on the table for children. And you make fun of him? How dare you do that? You know something? He just said his dream came true. Never take a man's dream away. Don't ever do that. Because tonight, his dream came true because he thought he met the champ, and in his mind, the only champ was Joe Louis. And then he said it. Well, guess what? My name tonight is Joe Louis.
What a heart.
Wow.
What a
So even telling the story to this day, I get chills telling it because it truly happened. And then he said, and then I thought of this quote. It said, how far you go in life depends upon your ability to be tender with the young and compassionate with the aged and tolerant of the weak and strong and those who strive, because someday in your life, you will have been all of those things yourself.
Wow.
And Muhammad Ali struggled too. He had health problems, very terrible health problems late in life. He had his ups, he had his downs, but he inspired people. He uplifted people. That's the phrase I wanted to. If there's a takeaway from this show, is find a way to uplift somebody in large or small ways. We need to uplift each other. But Ali was showing us that for a few moments, he could take his ego, put it aside, and uplift another human being. To me, that's the true reason he's the greatest of all.
Just
Wow.
class. Unbelievable.
Two things as we close, Roy. One, can I get your take on the baseball strike? And number two, close with your Kobe.
Okay, I'll make a quick one because we're almost out of time. I think baseball has got real problems with demographics. I think 18 teams last year were down almost 20% in attendance. I think young people aren't going to bother with the game if they're not careful. Yes, it's great when we're in Los Angeles and the Dodgers are in the World Series or in the mix every year, but for the large part around this country, most teams are not filling seats. And I think that they really both sides need to get very flexible, find a way to make this deal, because I don't think people are going to be very patient, and especially during a period of COVID where people are really struggling financially. So I think I don't have any crystal ball on what's going to happen, but if they go into late February or second week in February, we're not that far away, 3 weeks, and they haven't had they're going to miss some regular season games again. That's going to hurt the game because we already lost 100 games 2 years ago. And I think baseball will be in serious trouble if they don't get this thing worked out. Quick story about Kobe. We know, of course, the tragedy. Obviously, 9 people total, not just Kobe, were killed. And I was so despondent because I knew Kobe for a long time and interviewed him when he was 18 years old. And I was really low, like all of us were. I'm not saying I was the only one, but I didn't know what to do. So I was so depressed, and COVID hit right after we lost Kobe. So it's like a double whammy for all of us, especially in Los Angeles. And I said, what can I do that would be constructive? And I know this sounds still silly, but I made up my mind I would never have a dog again after I had to put my other yellow lab down. And I decided maybe something nice, I could adopt an animal. So I adopted a dog, and he was overweight. His name was Kobe. I named him Kobe. And he lost all the weight he had because we walk every day, about 9 miles every day. Wow. And I decided to write a children's book, which is also available on my website. But the nice part of this isn't just me plugging some book I wrote. It's a children's book. It's for like 3, 4, 5-year-olds. If you have grandchildren or children that age, you might want to get it. I'll sign it for you too if you want. But I called it Kobe and a Boy Named Roy. And we donate proceeds from this book to animal rescue. And we've raised thousands of dollars in Los Angeles for Labrador Retriever rescue. It's such great dogs.
That's great.
This dog really changed my life. And so it's my little tribute, my very, very, very small, humble way to the memory of a real charismatic figure in LA sports history and one of the most incredible competitive athletes I've ever been around. So the name of the book is Kobe and a Boy Named Roy.
And tell us about your show one more time on ESPN.
Oh yeah, it's called GOATs, Greatest of All Time. The first show, it's going to be 3 1-hour specials on ABC and ESPN. I'm grateful to be back interviewing again. Didn't think that was going to happen for a while. And we've interviewed so many people. We're still working on Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sugar Ray Leonard and Mike Tyson. We're working on those 3, but it's going to be a really cool show. And it talks about Jerry West's in that show, talking about his life, and it's pretty heavy stuff. And I'm just proud to have been back doing stuff at ESPN, and I hope that people get a chance to see it. GOATs, it's called.
Well, we're proud to have had you on the podcast, Roy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
guys.
Roy.
It was a great pleasure to do the show, and thank you for having me.
You betcha.
Just
Bye-bye.
fantastic. Just great.
Bye-bye.
I
So,
thought it was so ironic when Roy said to us, "Do you mind if I have time to tell you a story about Muhammad Ali?" I would listen to him tell a story about changing his socks. You know what I mean? I mean, the guy is just incredible, and the voices, the Paul McCartney, the Ali. I mean, he does an amazing Paul McCartney.
Yeah.
I mean, and to our viewers out there, I would go to RoyFirestone.com not only to buy his books. It's an entertaining voyage,
right.
because you see him do the songs when he mimics,
The Beatles.
the Beatles.
He's the fifth
Everybody.
Beatle. Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean,
Right.
the guy's so talented.
Well, I talked to Charlie Steiner. I said, Charlie's the voice of the Dodgers, and he's been a guest on our show. And I said, what can I expect from Roy? And he said, expect him to talk a lot.
Yeah, but man, I mean, how could you don't want to interrupt him. He's just, and the stories and the people he's met. I didn't even get the chance to talk to him about, you were throwing names at him. And there's so many more: Elton John, Miles Davis, Mickey Mantle, Nixon. I mean, I would love to, to find out. But you could talk to this man for 20 hours.
Yeah. Well, I'll look forward to see his series on GOAT. Greatest of all time.
Well, imagine the archives that he's going to come up with after over 6,000 interviews, the ones that he selected himself.
Oh no, he's not. They're not.
Oh, these are going to be live?
They're new interviews.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. So these are all going to be brand new.
Yeah.
Man, I'd like to get his highlight just of the 6,000 interviews he had. But this is going to be amazing.
He probably knows them all.
Oh, yeah. Just incredible story.
So, Derek, you said you wanted to hear another story from Billy?
Well, I don't want to follow that out.
Okay, so we won't let you follow it. I don't think I want to follow it either. So with that, we'll say goodnight.
I think we should say goodnight, but what a great interview. I don't want to follow that. Just terrific.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Roy.
Next week's guest, director, actor, producer, artist, Jeff McCracken.
We'll see you next week.